Well, it's a real pleasure to talk to my friends at ERPIC again, and to think about the beautiful island of Cyprus while I speak from Washington, D.C. Um, you asked me to talk about the outlook for the Biden administration and the Eastern Med. Well, first of all, I think overall, um, Biden is going to take a very positive attitude uh, towards the developments of recent years in the Eastern Med regarding Cyprus, Greece, and Israel. Um, uh, Biden, as many of your listeners know, um, has a long history as a supporter of the Hellenic world, of Greece and Cyprus. Um, he visited Cyprus as vice president. In 2014, he was the only vice president to do so since, except for Lyndon Johnson in 1962. He was, he, as a new senator, he supported the arms embargo on Turkey following the invasion of 1974. He has a long history. Also, as vice president, he was very actively involved in trying to bring the European Union around to an acceptable arrangement to help Greece out of its financial crisis. And I think that it really made a historic difference in improving Greek-American relations. So this is somebody who knows the Hellenic world well, has been very involved with it for decades, and also is very close to Hellenic Americans, has been for a long time. He's also a strong supporter of Israel. So Israeli-Greek, Israeli friendship, the so-called triangle, Greece, Israel, Cyprus, which has been evolving economically and also militarily. I think you will see him as a supporter. Of course, the other part of the Eastern Med that the Biden administration will have to consider is Turkey. And in fact, the framework of what happens in the Eastern Med, I think, is largely framed by Turkey, and particularly its recent assertive foreign policy, aggressive foreign policy. Look, I think Turkey remains an important relationship for the United States. And I do not think Biden is going to look to be provocative against Turkey. He certainly wants to be careful not to drive Turkey into the arms of the Russians. But he is very skeptical of Erdogan and of recent Turkish foreign policy. And this came through very clearly at the recent confirmation hearings for Secretary of State, now confirmed as Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, who referred to Turkey as a so-called strategic partner and said it's an ally that often doesn't act like an ally. Also at his confirmation hearing, Tony Blinken said that he did not rule out increasing the sanctions on Turkey as a result of their purchase of the S-400. Now, the Trump administration, to the surprise of many people, actually put some sanctions on Turkey just before leaving office. And these are very tough sanctions because they make it impossible for Turkey's main arms procurement agency, the SSB, to buy arms from the United States are to sell to other countries arms that require, are to sell to other country arms that have U.S. components in it, or for that matter, to produce arms for themselves, for Turkey, that have U.S. components. So it could have very far-reaching effect, particularly at a time when Turkey is putting a lot of effort and having some serious success in growing its military industrial sector and including its arms export sector. So those sanctions are far-reaching. When Blinken says he's going to see if we need to do additional sanctions, that should be very worrisome for Turkey, because the additional sanctions that are available, and they're all included in this piece of legislation that was passed in 2017, which is widely called CAATSA by its initials. It stands for Countering America's Adversaries Abroad Through Sanctions Act. The other sanctions have to do with hurting the Turkish economy. So Turkey has to be very concerned about the prospect of even further sanctions, but just the ones that are on will not be easy for them to work around. And particularly if they don't dispose of this S-400 problem, it will be difficult for them to even produce the sophisticated arms they need for their own purposes, because virtually all of them have U.S. components. That is very much going to frame the Biden administration's approach to the Eastern Mediterranean. I don't want to go into detail here about all the issues in U.S.-Turkish relations, but we know that the Turkish purchase of the S-400 air defense system from Russia is a major problem for the United States. That's the cause of the recent sanctions. And really, I do not think U.S.-Turkish relations can move forward very easily unless Turkey divests itself of those S-400s. That is not easy for Mr. Erdogan to do. He spent $2.5 billion on that purchase. That's roughly 10% of Turkey's annual defense budget. It will be very hard, but I think it's also going to be hard for him not to give up the S-400s, because it's going to bring increasing pressure on Turkey if he does not give them up. I was struck by a recent poll in Turkey that showed by 2-1, Turks believe that the problems that they have with the United States have been caused by foreign policy mistakes. And actually half of the voters for Erdogan's AK party felt that way. So I think if Erdogan does decide to give up the S-400s, he will have political room to do so. The problem is that his coalition partner, informal coalition partner, upon whom he's increasingly reliant, the Milli Hareket Partisi, Milliyetçi Hareket Partisi, the Nationalist Action Party, will make it very hard for him to give up that anti-missile system. Most analysts think Erdogan will never give it up. I think it's possible that he might, personally, because I think he's in a corner, and it's going to create more problems with the U.S., and it's going to create more problems in the Turkish economy. And he's going to have to come to some resolution of that, about that. And I think the alternative, which is tightening his relationship with Russia and leaving the Western alliance, is simply not palatable for Turkey and even not for Erdogan. There are other issues in U.S.-Turkish relations. Turkey very much resents that the U.S. is working in Syria with Syrian Kurds, whom the Turks see as closely linked to the PKK. And in fact, the group that the U.S. works with does have its origins in the PKK. The U.S. turned to them more or less as last resort, and they have been very effective partners. And it seems the early indications are that the Biden administration will continue that partnership with the Syrian Kurds, even while trying to broaden it, the relationship, to bring in other Syrian Kurdish parties that are not linked historically with the PKK. There are other issues. There is the issue of the Turkish state bank, Halkbank, which is being sued in the Southern District of New York in a case that will start in the beginning of March. It's being sued for collaborating with Iran to circumvent sanctions. And based on the evidence and other past trials of particularly of one of its executives, it seems likely to end up in a conviction. Erdogan tried hard to get Trump to drop that case. Trump actually tried, but the Department of Justice in the end would not do it. Biden has already made clear that he is not going to interfere with the Department of Justice on this case or on any other case. And the case will go forward. If it results in a conviction, it will certainly hurt Turkey's credit rating and affect its ability to get foreign investment. And there does seem to be a very good chance that evidence regarding the Erdogan family's own corruption and Erdogan himself, his own corruption, could come out at that trial. So that will certainly hurt the tone of relations. And one very big issue that I haven't mentioned yet, that was almost forgotten about during the Trump era, is human rights. Biden is all about human rights. He will speak out about human rights. That's clear. During the campaign, he actually referred to Erdogan as an autocrat and said that the U.S. should help the opposition. Now, I don't expect him to try to help the opposition, whatever that would mean, as president. I think that was something he said in an early campaign interview at the New York Times, but it did show his gut reaction about Erdogan. And he's also talked about having a conference of democracies very early in his administration, and with particular focus on backsliding democracies. I know some people may think that the U.S., after the experience we had on January 6th, is a backsliding democracy, but and I think the U.S. will be honest about its own recent failings, but fortunately, our democracy held, our institutions held, and the transition did take place, although certainly not in as smooth or as perfect a fashion as we would have wanted. So I think what happened January 6th will not hold Biden back from having this meeting of democracies. And more important, he will speak out. He and his administration will speak out and criticize Turkey for its many human rights lapses. And actually, something just happened this past weekend. I'm talking to you on January 27th. This past weekend, the Biden State Department criticized Turkey for not releasing the leader of the pro-Kurdish liberal party, the HDP, the People's Democracy Party. The leader of this party has been in jail since 2016 on flimsy charges. Mainly, his crime was being a good candidate, which Erdogan didn't like, and Erdogan's coalition partner doesn't like it. He's been in jail since 2016. The Trump administration never mentioned his name. The Biden administration had. They spoke out and criticized it. Just Saturday, just a few days after they were inaugurated. And I think you'll hear a lot of criticism of human rights in Turkey from the Biden administration. And of course, it will not go down well with the Erdogan government. There are other issues. Turkey has its complaints. I mentioned the Syrian Kurdish group, the YPG, that the U.S. works with. That's Turkey's biggest complaint, and it's not just Erdogan's. It's something that is felt across most of the Turkish spectrum. It's something that's felt across most of the Turkish political spectrum. There's also the issue of the U.S. Continuing to allow Fethullah Gulen, whom Erdogan blames for the 2016 coup attempt. The U.S. allows him to continue to reside here and has not extradited him because, according to the U.S., Turkey has not presented convincing evidence that he was involved in the coup. In fact, another problem that's unstated is that there's quite a bit of evidence that Erdogan and the people around him feel that the U.S. itself was involved in the coup and possibly involved in the planning of it. And remember, that took place under at the time of the Obama administration, when Biden was vice president. As a matter of fact, the U.S. was slow to condemn the coup, in my view, but had nothing to do with the actual planning or execution of it. I think people here were shocked by it. But Erdogan seems to believe that the U.S. was involved. His interior minister actually accused the U.S. of that, and I doubt he spoke without the approval of Erdogan. So there's a lot of bad blood. Now, regarding Eastern Med gas, I think the U.S. will be supportive of whatever arrangements Israel and Cyprus and Egypt work out. There is the issue of profitability. Gas prices have gone down. But on the more pressing issue of will Turkey encroach on Cyprus's EEZ, on Cyprus's economic exclusion zone, and on Greece's, I think the U.S. will strongly criticize it. And if Turkey is too aggressive, I would personally not be surprised to see the U.S. at least show the flag with the Sixth Fleet. I do not expect any kind of military confrontation, and certainly the U.S. would not want that. But I don't think the people in the Eastern Med should, and particularly in Cyprus, should expect miracles from the Biden administration. There's a lot on Biden's foreign policy plate. China, Russia, North Korea, the Iran nuclear agreement. We could go on and on. I don't think solving the Cyprus problem is going to be a high priority, but he does care about Cyprus. He does care about the issue. He knows the issue well. I don't know how strongly he will push for a resolution, which, after all, has not been achieved in all these many decades of efforts. But I don't think he will let Cyprus get pushed around. I think another reason that the U.S. is likely to continue the strong stand, which, by the way, began with the Obama administration and continued with Trump's, in favor of Cyprus's right to explore in its EEZ, I think another factor for the United States in that regard is that Noble Energy, which was one of the leaders in the efforts to explore Aphrodite and explore in general in the Cypriot waters, has been bought out by a U.S. company, Chevron. And I think that will give the U.S. even more incentive to make sure that Cyprus's rights to explore in its EEZ are not encroached upon. Look, I just, so as not to, I've already gone on, I'm sure, way too long, but maybe just to sum up, I would just say, I think it boils down to this. A Biden administration is going to be friendlier to the Hellenic world than the previous two administrations. And it's probably going to be less friendly to Turkey. So at least starting off, I think there's reason for Cyprus to be hopeful about the Biden administration. And by the way, also good reason for Cyprus to hope to build on the increasing bilateral relations that it has been developing with Washington, that in many ways began under the Trump administration, and I think are likely to develop even further under Biden. As I say, don't expect too much, but I think it's very clear that Cyprus has a friend in the White House in Joe Biden.